Okay, I think we're just opening our gates to the public now. So welcome to those joining the call. We're just going to wait another minute or so before we make a start. All right, I can see a healthy number of people have joined the webinar. That number is continuing to tick up, but we're a couple of minutes in, so we will begin. So welcome to this best practice webinar. My name is Joshua Routh. I'm the Director of Hosting Products here at HighWire, and we're here today to discuss a vital and extremely complex challenge. AI is having a disruptive impact on your content. For example, LLMs have changed your ability to control how your content is represented. They've changed your ability to monitor how your content is being engaged with. But of course, the technology is in many ways evolving faster than the standards and tools we have to manage it. So what can we do to make sure the content which we are responsible for is safeguarded and that it has a meaningful impact on the world? The solution is, of course, to talk to each other, to share our challenges and opportunities so that the wider community can benefit from the experience of others. And that's exactly what we'll be doing today. We have a stellar cast of experts who we will meet shortly. But first of all, some housekeeping. So this webinar is being recorded. The recording will be shared with you after this meeting and it will be freely accessible. So feel free to share it with anyone. Each of our three speakers will have 15 minutes each. We'll then have 30 minutes for questions at the end. So please do ask questions in the Q&A box of Zoom, and we'll have that last 30 minutes in which I will get through as many of those as possible. Our speakers today have a wealth of domain expertise from a range of backgrounds. We're going to start with Pascal Hetzscholdt, Senior Director, AI Strategy and Content Integrity at Wiley. He leads on multiple initiatives on IP protection, ethical AI, and compliance frameworks for scholarly publishing. We'll then move on to Mark Hahnel, VP of Open Research at Digital Science. Mark is also the founder of Figshare and is on the board of DataCite, DOAJ, R3 Data, and the Journal of Open Research Software. And then finally, we'll hear from Josh Nicholson, the Chief Strategy Officer of Research Solutions and co-founder of Cite. Josh was also previously the founder and CEO of Winnower and Authoria, both aimed at improving how scientists publish and collaborate. So they've all worked in various capacities with AI and with publishing. They were approaching it from slightly different angles to give a range of perspectives on a complex matter. And then we'll have Q&A session after that. So again, reminder, please do ask questions in the Q&A box. But first, it's a brief reminder of the problem statement that we're addressing here. That there is, of course, a great deal of unknown about the future now. But what we are confident in is that publishing as we know it is changing. It has already changed. Many of the models we are comfortable with and understand can no longer be relied on. And here are a few examples of that. It was well known in the past that if I make Google happy, my content will be discovered. But recently, for the first time since the dawn of the internet, we're seeing a pretty significant drop in google.com as a referrer to a lot of scholarly content. But where will that end? We're not sure. It will almost certainly end in a state in which we don't have the familiar 10 blue links, but that remains an unanswered question. We also know if I comply with industry standards to protect my content, I will keep control of it. That unfortunately is also no longer true. We have ample evidence of robots.txt being completely ignored by large technical players. Bot management is a completely different beast to how it was in the past. At HighWire, we've had to triple the size of our systems team managing bots because they are so much more aggressive now. So it's a different state entirely. We also would, in the past, say, if I review analytics reports, I can see precisely how my content is being used. That has now also completely changed with zero-click encounters from LLMs. Our ability to give narrative around how content is being engaged with is being completely disrupted. And there are various initiatives to help with that, including coming from Counter. But right now, it's a different state to how it's been for the last 20 years. And then finally, if my content is displayed elsewhere, it will be correctly represented. Researchers are, of course, using LLMs to do their research, but the results of scientific content in the LLMs are not the way that the authors would like it to be. There is retracted content out there, there's older versions out there, or the correct content, but the citations are missing or completely incorrect. There are, again, groups working on this, including the Responsible AI Group from the STM Association, but right now, these are huge challenges. We don't expect to have answers to all those challenges today, but let's move across now to our speakers to learn about their activities in this space so that collectively we can react to these changes appropriately. Starting, please, with Pascal. Over to you.
So thank you so much, Joshua. I will start sharing my screen, and I wanted to thank you and HighWire for this opportunity. It's great to be with you today to discuss these important topics. And for Wiley, it has been quite a journey. Although we had many years of experience relevant to machine learning, logically, the sudden introduction of the chatbots, the LLMs, were being used in a matter of weeks by hundreds of millions of users, has indeed been very disruptive for everybody. I think active in what we call critical sectors, right? So we do regard scientific research as one of those, but of course there's also, for example, finance, healthcare, the legal profession. And I think what they have in common is that it's really important for the model output to be accurate and verifiable, right? So first things first, we have decided as a company to promote responsible AI. And today I will, carefully explain what we mean by that. But before I do, I wanted to share with you just where we got our wisdom from, right? The good news is, as we have published just yesterday, that we have done the second edition of our survey among thousands of researchers, asking them what they feel is important when using an AI in this day and age. And you can go to visit that link that you see on the screen at wiley.com to read more about that and just how they feel about attribution, assistance by chatbots, using them for the creation of images, how reliable they think they are, and things like that, right? So we have posted many of those insights on our webpage. You can access them for free. And you can also learn more about many of the initiatives we are deploying to actually make it so, make it possible for people to verify where data is coming from. So a really beautiful example you can find on dummies.com. If you go there, you will find an AI button, and you can prompt all of our dummies books for free, but you will also see where the source material is coming from which book, right? So I think that that's really, really important as a metaphor for what I will be explaining today. So one sort of more professional take on that, or more advanced take, I should say, would be our Wiley AI Gateway. If you go and have a look on the page that I put on this slide, you will see that this is about an initiative to enable users of Perplexity, Claude, Mistral, AWS models to actually prompt research directly, right? So you actually get an option underneath the prompt window to select a tool, a Scholar Gateway, to get access to verifiable and reliable research, right? So you get some demos on there, and you can read up on all of this. But it's important for you to know that we get our wisdom from the researchers themselves. We're asking them, what do you feel is important? And we're translating that into useful AI tools. So as a company, we're focusing on three core areas. Logically, there's the licensing of our books and research papers for AI training purposes. So in this case, you know about the garbage in, garbage out quote. We want to make sure that AI models can train on reliable and verifiable and also accurate and updated information. That's not something people think about often, right? That it's important to correct information and update information, and then retrain models on that. Secondly, there's embedding AI in workflows, to improve efficiency, shorten workflows, duration of publication, stuff like that, from manuscript to publication. So that's really important to us. And then there's, assistance relevant to all of the work that the researchers are doing. It can be summarization, translation, but we want to make sure that we can accelerate that research without compromising quality. So AI should enhance and not replace human expertise. So when we're talking about responsible AI, I promised you to explain what we mean by that. Well, it's about reliable, verifiable training data, actually knowing where it's coming from. Not many people know that some of the larger models have been trained on 41,000 retracted research papers. So that means if people look up information about certain topics, they may get erroneous data back, right? That's not something we want. And similarly, not many people know that some of the models have been trained on the dark web. And that's where you find all kinds of questionable data, data resulting from data breaches, a lot of personally identifiable information. And that, of course, brings all kinds of other risks relevant to data privacy and security with them. But it's also about explainability of the model. So how was the output actually being generated? And more importantly, human intervention. At different stages of the process of an AI model, from system prompt to moderation and labeling and tagging of information, specific protocols relevant to political model output or financial data, it's being moderated by humans and influenced by humans, right? And that may not be the perfect situation for the legal profession or even the medical profession and scientific research. You want models to be neutral and as objective as possible, right? So as long as that is not the case, and all kinds of testing sort of proves that on a day-to-day basis, as we can learn from, the news media, it's important to disclose the use of AI in manuscripts, in scientific research, and make sure that we still allow for attribution, fact-checking, and bias mitigation. So that goes back to the first link I showed you. If you go to our website, you can read up on all of the guidance that we have created for researchers as to how they can prevent issues from happening in the future and make sure that people can trust what they create, even when they use AI as an assistant. It's also about ethical AI development, right? So we're prioritizing fairness, transparency. We want to avoid systems being trained on unlicensed or questionable data, as I mentioned. And we want to make sure that there's alignment with human rights, and that we also give room to other languages and other cultures and other religions, for example, making sure that AI model output is as fair as possible. I refer to the fact that some models have been trained on content that contains a lot of personally identifiable information, right? So we need to limit the negative outcome of that and output, and make sure that people's privacy is being protected. Logically, because we are very much focusing on licensing agreements right now, we want everybody to respect intellectual property rights and avoid something Joshua has been referring to: unauthorized scraping, ingestion, and mimicry of proprietary or copyrighted content. And finally, we obviously recommend everybody not only to keep track of how they are using AI as assistants when creating their works, but also to audit models. That's not something you hear often, but it's really, really important to audit it for accuracy, reliability, security, and data privacy. These are some other tips that you can think of, data sheets, model cards that sort of describe, the status of a certain model and how advanced it is in certain areas. A lot of people are also thinking about evals, evaluation platforms, red teaming to make sure that you keep an eye on the functionality and the reliability of a model. We also recommend to disclose any fine-tuning or unlearning relevant to the data that is being used for training, or maybe even pruning data from the neural network and things like that. And then develop explainable AI solutions to help users understand and also contest model outputs when necessary. And logically, all of this needs to lead to a situation where we can mitigate harmful uses and abuse, right? We have been mentioning a lot of issues that can happen with models when they are being used for nefarious purposes, but more recently, you may have been hearing about issues relevant to child safety, or models becoming unhinged and spiraling along with people who actually are suffering from mental health issues, right? And that can lead to all kinds of undesirable situations. And logically, no company wants to facilitate models that are unhinged or cause damage like this. So all in all, my conclusion would be that we need to make sure that models align their policies with evolving legal frameworks, that they anticipate and mitigate unintended societal impacts, and that they support independent audits and allow for regulatory oversight of high-risk AI applications. Last but not least, there's the challenges relevant to sustainability, as we're all aware of, right? A lot of the data centers that are being used to do the calculations, the inference, the training, they have to make use right now of a lot of fossil fuels, which can have really damaging consequences. And they are a burden to many communities where sometimes, the electricity costs can rise as a result, for the residential areas. And that is something that, of course, is not a good consequence. Same goes for the effects on the environment and nature as a result of, the data centers producing all kinds of pollution, for example. One thing that I wanted to share with you that you don't hear much about, but which is really important and which we have identified, is that, for example, in the early days, people would go visit the GP, the doctor, and would print out some results from Google search and ask the doctor about this, and were willing and able to have discussions on the basis of the information they found on the internet. We have received information that this kind of practice has been increasing, meaning people are using ChatGPT now to ask questions, not only collecting information before they go to the GP, but also while present with the medical specialist or the doctor, right? And what we think will happen is that, human experts will have a much harder time in the future to counter some of the arguments, because people tend to trust the AI assistant a little bit more than the human experts, right? So they arrive at these offices equipped with AI, emotionally invested, and the AI empowers them to actually try and counter whatever argument they may not like, or they don't trust the expert for whatever reason. So these conversations will get more tough in the future as a result of this way of putting forward information. We have even seen in the news that lawyers have been using AI for their work in court, and even when it was flagged with them that the AI models made errors, they still used AI to formulate the excuses towards the judge, right? Which was quite amazing. So that's how far things are going. So we think that the opportunity here is to try and transform experts into AI literate allies, to make sure that they're also capable of countering whatever consumers or citizens are coming up with on the basis of their AI usage. So as a vision for the future, we very much see responsible AI as a competitive advantage. We think it will democratize science, and we want to do that without compromising rights. We want to keep human insight central in the age of automation. And we want to make sure that we define licensing rules before indiscriminate ingestion becomes the norm. and we are collaborating with the regulators to embed safeguards. We don't think AI will replace publishers, but publishers who don't use AI responsibly will replace those who don't. Thank you so much for your attention and looking forward to the Q&A.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Pascal. And those last examples were particularly interesting and terrifying as well. Just a reminder that for everyone to add questions to the Q&A panel through Zoom. If you do have any questions, we've got a good set there already, but please continue. And now over to Mark.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to hopefully seamlessly follow on from what we heard from Pascal. My name is Mark Hahnel, VP of Open Research and at Digital Science, and the founder of Figshare. Our interest in this conversation is slightly different in that we build tech tools for the research community. This means that we don't actually have content created. We're not a peer-reviewed publisher. We do have tools that generate content. One of them is Figshare, which is largely focused on data sets, but accepts other types of outputs as well. And we have Dimensions, which has 100 million full-text articles, which we're looking at ways to provide more nuanced AI, very much what Pascal was saying about responsible AI, understanding that this is a new space and there are lots of different angles from which to approach AI. And I don't want to get sidelined away from the fact that the academic community and the research community and driving research forward is one of the biggest benefactors from the potential of AI. So if we just start there, if I start with this figure, which you may be aware of, this is just saying, well, why are we doing this? We take a step back and saying, why are we doing this? There's AI in every tool that I use now. There's AI asking me to redraft my emails. There's AI, as we just heard, using the LLMs to help us with medical advice or psychological advice, or where to go on holiday. And so there's a very broad starting point. But if you take it to a very, very narrow focal point, you get things like this, which is, you may be familiar with DeepMind. It's a UK-based company that took 170,000 protein structures from the protein data bank and trained their models on it, and were able to generate new information. And this is the key part here. So protein folding structure is very important in drug discovery. If you have a protein sequence, how it folds will predict how well drugs bond to it. And we had over 50 years of research. We had about 170,000, 200,000 protein structures that we knew of. And DeepMind took it from 190,000 over 50 years to 1 million in a year. And they're now at 200 million structures. So every protein structure that we want to know about, we now know about. And this is why I wanted to take a step back to just think about how enormous the step changes can be in the industry we work in if we are responsible with AI, and if we allow the AI to build on top of what's gone before and generate new knowledge. It's obviously not as simple as that, but and there are lots of stories like this, but they did win the Nobel Prize for Chemistry last year as a demonstration of how profound the changes can be in research due to AI. And when we think about, if I just go back to my point there about new knowledge, if we think about academia and building on top of the research that's going along, that's gone before as a flywheel, so you have raw data, information. Data doesn't need to be data sets, as I'll show you, but this knowledge extraction tools mining these outputs for higher order insights, which form a new refined data set, is this new knowledge that we're looking for. And so when we think about using AI for new knowledge, I think we always have to think about protecting our business models as publishers, protecting our ethical responsibilities in ways that some of the larger LLMs may not be. But I think if we always have this focal point of AI can be the most transformational thing in research, then we've got to be thinking about how can you work in this space with the things that you can control, and where can you use it to your advantage right now. So an example of that, just to pull it back to the academic literature, this is using dimensions, which is one of our tools. And this is a rather simple concept to get your head around, right? The knowledge is out there in the papers. There's lots of papers out there. The knowledge is in there. So this is just looking at the treatment sequences mentioned in the literature in the context of prostate cancer. So if you're trying to treat cancer, certain types of cancer, you might try one drug. It might work and then not work. Then you try another drug and then you try another drug. But that information is all out there, but you just need to mine that data in a way that is informative in order to pull out new knowledge. And this is just text and data mining, but it requires a few steps in order to get there, so you can start pulling out these higher order insights. But, you know, I think thinking about research in that way makes you realize just how important all of the content that you have is as a publisher. And if you think about your content, what is good content? Well, there's lots of good academic content out there, right? And good is a moving, it's a fluid thing. And so, you know, we've seen there's a lot of publications out there. We've seen the amount of publications grow enormously. In my world, which was originally the academic data sets world, you know, there's already 2 million data sets published a year, which is more than the number of papers that were published in the year 2000. So it's a very new space, data set publishing, but we see it's bigger than it was, than academic publishing was of peer-reviewed papers 25 years ago. Meanwhile, the number of publications published every year has quadrupled in that time. We've also seen the birth of preprints, not necessarily the birth, but archives been going a long time, but we see that there's every one of these graphs is a hockey stick. You know, if you zoom in on preprints, you'll see that the cumulative amount of knowledge that is being created is huge. But when we say knowledge, you know, show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcomes. There's reasons why we have more publications. There's reasons why researchers are publishing more papers than ever before. So we touched on this in terms of content that's good or bad. Chinese LLMs, including DeepSeek, are trained on my illegal archive of books, not mine, and papers, the largest in the world. This is Anna's blog. Think of it as a follow-on to Sci-Hub for those who are familiar with it. So when I say think about trying to work within the barriers of what you can control and what you can't control, is be aware that if your files are on the internet, they have already been consumed for training these big models, and be aware that that's not necessarily a good thing for you, and it's not necessarily a good thing for them. I think as we get more competitive in the LLM space, you will see people using LLMs for a variety of different reasons. Why should you use ChatGPT over Claude, over Gemini? And that might be that I agree with their ethics. They are more transparent about how they work. They don't train their data on content that's illegally sourced. They don't train their content on this. They only train their content on academic content that is past the threshold that we deem to be good. And when I say deem to be good, it's because we know that AI models are using material from retracted scientific papers. That's not great, but I think once the genie is out of the bottle here, you know, if they've done that already, then they are not necessarily going to remove content from their training models. But I do think that this is one area that the academic community could push on and say, we have clearly labeled what is retracted. You should not be training your models on that. Any models that do can train themselves on content that is illegal, that has been retracted, we will assume is an inferior AI model. And the most interesting part that I've seen recently that I think is relevant to this community and thinking about what needs immediate action, I was at the Future of Scientific Publishing event at the Royal Society in the summer, and a colleague from Elsevier made this quote, which was, they fielded 3.5 submissions, published 700,000, and saw a 600,000 increase in submissions year on year. That's a 20% increase in the number of submissions they got in 1 year. It's not like they haven't been around a long time and these incentives haven't been there to publish for a long time, but it's suggesting something else is happening. And if we look at the number of publications coming out each year, we know that we're going to get more and more publications. So where are all these 600,000 new publications coming from? Well, as I mentioned with Figshare, we allow the publication of different types of content. None of it is peer reviewed, which works well for data sets where you have, it's really copy editing more than peer review. It's do you have enough metadata to go with your files? Whereas the preprint space has been inundated with lots of content that ranges from borderline philosophical, non-academic content to content that's scientifically rigorous or academically rigorous, but doesn't bring you anything new. So I can write a paper on a topic that I choose, and because I'll have created it with an LLM, everything that I say will be true, but the human in the mix is not creating the new content anymore. And so what value does it add to just regurgitate the same information, have garbage in, you'll get garbage out. So academic research is in the business of generating new knowledge. So as academics, we're looking to generate new knowledge, and the AI, we are asking to generate new knowledge too. If you keep those two things as your focal points, then it makes it easy to get around the stuff that technically might be okay, but is it really advancing your mission as a publisher? Is it really helping you in any way there? Pascal also mentioned this. One of the big things that the data world has been big for a while, and I think is also important in what you can control, is can you make your content findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable for humans and machines? This is something you can control that can have lots of benefits for you. You may have heard of search engine optimization before. We now have generative engine optimization, GEO, which is how can you make your content show up in the AI models, so in the LLM, so you'll see more traffic being driven that way. Ian Mulvaney actually just put out a post today that said BMJ, 2.8% of their content, their traffic is coming from AI tools right now, and I'm sure we'll see that rocket over time. So it could be an area that you could focus your attentions in order to get more exposure to your content and an early advantage. And that's why I would suggest that you should prioritize fair for machines with your content. You don't have to read this because we don't have too much time, but the slides will be shared afterwards. This is just looking at machine readability and some areas you can focus your attention. So there's JATS XML. It's in PubMed Central. There's a lot of content that has JATS XML markup already. Schema.org and JSON-LD. If you want to do well in the Google engines, use schema.org. Make your references open by default. 88% of people were already doing that before Crossref made it the mandatory side of things. Having open abstracts, it's only at 52% in the publishing space, so that might also help as we heard about the STM group encouraging LLMs to have better behavior when it comes to academic information. If we can get that up to 100%, you might have more ability with some of the more trusted LLMs and models going forward. And when it comes to things like math and figures, I do think there's things like JAX for R, which are useful in this. The compliance is patchy, but at the same time, I think AIs are getting very good at pulling math using OCR from PDFs anyway. If you wanted to push it even further, there's something called Croissant. Croissant is a metadata format for helping standardize machine learning data sets. When I say machine learning data sets, all of your metadata that is publicly available, if you make it available in a Croissant format, it will get plugged into all of these different systems. It's co-created by Google. They are the driving force behind it, but it also might enable you to have better geo going forward. One area that you may be aware of that I have I wouldn't say controversial opinions, but different opinions to a lot of people in the space. Creative Commons have a license suite which is very human and machine readable. So CC BY, I don't mean to be patronizing, but it means if you use my content, cite my content, but you're free to use my content however you want. They're bringing out something called CC Signals, which is don't use my content to train your models, or it's a spectrum all the way up to that. So it starts with you must give credit. I like that one. The AI the AI system must be open. For example, AI systems must satisfy the model openness framework, which all of the big LLMs do not. So while I like the idea of having control of your information, I think this is a potential area where you may fall down and you say, we're going to implement the CC signals, and everybody will say, don't use my content for advancing knowledge, and so it couldn't be used in, for example, DeepMind in its Nobel Prize winning stuff, because that stuff is not open. So I think, again, taking a step back and looking at, we are thinking about research driving forward to better humanity and solve all the sustainable development goals. And if you put blockers on it just because, I think it will be ultimately detrimental to the reuse of your work and your author's work. So just to finish off from my end, just some fun things about if you do make your content available in a way that's machine readable and fair for machines, not only can you make yourself better exposed to things like generative engine optimization, but you can also start to use tools that will take your text, annotate your text, and make it more semantic. By more semantic, I mean it's got more links in it. These links can be used to power knowledge graphs, and knowledge graphs can be the base of AI models. So you can essentially help build AI models just on your content alone, which if you're a society publisher, may be a really useful thing for the people working in your space, because they don't want to go to ChatGPT that has, 20,000 Reddit posts with controversial viewpoints about your subject, but you can just say, here is information just based in a RAG format on the knowledge that we are creating. We do this a lot at Digital Science. We are looking at ways in which we can, pull research statements from literature and turn that into statements and facts. And again, if you make your content available in a way that is more structured, you will be able to do this with your outputs as well. So just to sum up, my thoughts are, there's a lot of content that is going to be submitted to your journals that may be over. I think everybody is familiar with the idea that we want our researchers to have AI co-pilots to help them move further faster. But if it is just AI generating content that we already know about and it doesn't add anything to the scholarly record, I would put some policies in place there. And secondly, if you can and you do have the resources available to do this, it's a very exciting time if you can make your content more machine readable and get the policies in place for reuse from the different types of generative models that want to make use of your research. You could get a really good boost from being early to the party. And that's everything from me. Thank you.
Fantastic stuff. Thanks, Mark. And now finally on to Josh.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Pascal. I think those were both very interesting talks, and I think actually set up my talk quite well. My name is Josh. I'm going to start to share my screen and not show you all my emails or other things looking at. So today I'm going to talk, a little bit kind of, very practically, like how can we engage with AI, right? I think we've seen a variety of different approaches, from blocking to full-on licensing to somewhere in between. And I look at this from the perspective of Mark talking about how amazing AI is. It can help, look at new crystal structures for protein structures. It can help, people better digest and understand the literature. And this builds kind of upon something that we've been doing for a long time at Scite and now at Research Solutions with AI. So I'm going to tell a little bit of a story about Cite and how we've been working with publishers already to use AI, because we've been Cite.ai since day one, to help with trust and research, and how that I think can really start to be used in this new generative AI world. And so a little bit of history on Cite, where we are, and also as it relates to kind of AI in publications in general. And so I am a cell biologist by training. It's funny now I'm talking about licensing AI. I started Cite with my co-founders really in response to growing concerns around trust and reproducibility, right? So a lot of people are very aware of this article. It comes from some senior executives in Amgen, and what they found basically is that a lot of the times you can't reproduce studies. And so this reproducibility crisis has been seen across different disciplines and has long been a challenge, right? How do we know what is trustworthy? How do we know what to rely upon? How do we know what to fund? What is impact, et cetera? And so historically, we've relied upon citations, citation counts, impact factor, H-index, et cetera. And so, we have been thinking about trust in the research space for a long time, and how can we identify and incentivize that? And this paper, back in 2014, really was kind of written as the idea behind Cite. Wouldn't it be great if we had like a trust marker, right? And we called this the R factor. And in this R factor, we, are looking, has this paper been supported or challenged? Funny enough, we didn't think we'd do it. We said some other big company like Thomson Reuters or Elsevier, NCBI should do it. But ultimately, we started to take this on, right? And so here is, Cite kind of 0.1. This is now looking at citations in a more nuanced and contextual way. And I promise I am getting to the AI licensing, but I think this full story is very helpful. And so this is, going beyond just a list of titles into the context of scholarly articles. Here we are now. We've been doing this almost a decade. We've partnered with a lot of different publishers to build out these next generation of citations. And so we've built Cite to make research more reliable, to make it more understandable, and I would say to introduce the next generation of citations. And I think here is where there's something that is particularly relevant to generative engine optimization, to LLMs, and to this bridge between ChatGPT and scholarly documents. And so very quickly, here's the main study coming out of my PhD. In today's world, we've looked at scopuses and Web of Science and traditional citation indices. We are starting to see traditional links, right, being used in chatbots, right? They link back to open access sources, et cetera. It was very nice to hear this BMJ stat where I think it's 2.5% of their traffic is now coming from chatbots. And so citations are crucial in this new world, right? And I would say they're crucial historically in the coming of the web with PageRank as well. And so with Cite, we've gone beyond that to show this context, showing, not just, hey, this article cites it, but here's exactly how it cites it. And so we've done this by partnering with publishers to get access to full text, to use AI, mostly machine learning and large language and deep learning models, to be able to extract this out at scale. And so this is a cooperation that's already happening amongst many publishers, right? We've signed dozens and dozens of indexing agreements with publishers to get access to the full text so that we can ingest and chop up, using a lot of machines, these articles into these smart citations. Where I think this is going is that these smart citations could become a bridge for the ChatGPTs of the world and the scholarly documents. And so, here again, this is kind of, what I would say is still AI, right? Mark mentioned that at Digital Science they're using AI, and yes, maybe generative, but also a lot of this, I would say, more vanilla, where they're looking at machine learning models and they're extracting these things out. And all this seemed okay, right? We're okay with classifiers. We're okay with kind of doing this. Generative, because it's so easy and so flexible and so available, has really kind of made us look at AI in a different way. And I think publishers are starting to react to AI, which has been, TDM agreements now to like LLM agreements. And how can we as publishers, or we as society members, start to utilize this information? And so again, just running through this quickly because I want to get to the main point here. We've published on Cite, and you can find out more about, how we're building this out. We do work with publishers to display this information. And so again, in partnership with publishers, we're using AI to better identify trustworthy research articles. In comes ChatGPT, right? And so here is where we are, I would say, today, right? ChatGPT is amazing. It's the fastest growing product ever. I think there's 100 million users in less than 6 months, but it is very, very hard to trust. On the one side, you have the ability for a user to ask any single question, and on the other side, you have research articles that are probably the best content, if you will, right? There's evidence, there's analysis, there's data, there's research, there's peer review, the best kind of content separate from it, right? And so how do we connect these in a way that allows us to have those powerful outputs that Mark just highlighted, but not blow up our entire industry, right? What can we do to say, here's a way for AI to use this, how can we license this, how can we utilize this? And so, I think, and maybe this is because I see everything as citations now, I think citations are needed, right? And I think these next generation of citations or chunks are going to become increasingly important in the world of zero-click search, as Joshua highlighted, or generative engine optimization. And so, Wiley, I think, has taken a lead on this, where here is Dale Morgan tweeting, not 3 hours ago, maybe a few weeks ago, talking about, direct licensing of their content, right? And it's direct through API. They've announced partnerships with Anthropic, as well as Perplexity and others. And I think what I'm highlighting here is that there's two delivery formats. There's AI-ready chunks, and there's full text XML dumps. And if you think about AI-ready chunks, it's very similar to the smart citations that we have, right? We've spent 8 years chunking up research articles in partnership with publishers. Wiley starting to deliver these chunks to AI tools for retrieval augmented generation. We propose that we can work with publishers to do that similarly. And so what this looks like, and this is really kind of the money slide, if you will, from this, what this looks like is a user has a prompt, right? I'm trying to be agnostic here around whether they're using Claude or whether they're using ChatGPT or whatever. A user has a prompt. It utilizes some AI system. That AI system can go and search internal documents if you're a large pharma. It could go search the web if you have deep research. It could go potentially search some open sources, but more curated like patents. But it could also look at a pan-publisher model context protocol, a pan-publisher AI gateway, right? And this AI gateway could be populated with these snippets, right? And so how I see the smart citations that we've developed with publishers is, why not open up fragments of the articles to AI for retrieval augmented generation? It allows you to, be surfaced more relevantly, more attributed in these models. It allows you to track these things such as usage, right? Not just click-throughs, but how many times has the AI interrogated your article, right? Did it summarize your article? Looking at these things in a way that gives the AI and the user value, but doesn't blow up the version of record, right? On the other side, you still have the version of record. You would see a preview of it, and you would go, hopefully, read the full text of the article. And so this is something that I see, emerging out of our field with Wiley, with us at Research Solutions, with a few other groups, trying to identify a mechanism and a data format to deliver peer-reviewed articles directly to LLMs in a way that, brings in recurring revenue, solves attribution, and then I think solves some of the trust issues that we saw with hallucinations. And so Cite is now working with publishers really as a tech provider to say, hey, we've chunked up all your articles. We can open that up and be your AI gateway in partnership with you, that you can license. We would be the tech provider here, that you can license as part of your subscription or however you want to license it. And so this all comes back, to this kind of story of, us working across different publishers as a publisher neutral source to chunk up millions of articles. Those chunks now, I think, are valuable, much more valuable beyond just like the research community looking at citations, but more valuable really to bridging this gap between generative AI and research articles in a way that I think solves the things that we need to solve, which is attribution, which is, again, maintaining some of the business models here and expanding them, I would say, if anything, and making it discoverable, right? Because people are living in these tools. We want to give them the best content so they can make better informed decisions. And I know friends that now treat ChatGPT essentially as a doctor, which is sometimes scary. And so, I'm going to close out with a few references to a piece that I published semi-recently, I guess not recently at all. It feels more recent than that, in Scholarly Kitchen that outlines, how we can license research articles to AI in a way that I think is more stable. And then I really want to conclude here that, again, we've been using AI or thinking about AI for a long time. And so here is Eugene Garfield back in 1964, which, again, I'm going to repeat, back in 1964, talked about something very similar to what I'm talking about now. And what he talks about is saying, hey, it would be interesting to speculate whether transformational or any other automatic analysis of such a paragraph could produce a useful additional marker. So he's talking about a citation index, and he's talking about adding these markers to it. And he says these markers would appear in the published citation index along with the usual citation data. And so you could have a paragraph, and that paragraph with a citation could be a critiquing citation. One statement could be Mr. X is wrong, or my personal favorite could be a calamity for mankind citation, which I have a hard time guessing what that is. And then very presciently, he closes saying the intelligent machine, AI, would examine a new document and generate a critical statement such as rather poor paper. And so this is our reality today, right? We do have intelligent machines. They are examining new documents, whether that's through the web or what you upload, and they're generating a ton, right? There's amazing AI peer review tools being released daily. And I think there's very powerful writing tools. And so we need to solve this gap in a way that is responsible, fair, all the things that were presented, ahead of mine, so that we can, use these tools more responsibly. And I'll conclude there, and I'm looking forward to the discussion and questions. Thanks.
Great stuff. Thank you to Josh and to all our panelists. So we're going to open it up for questions now. We've got a set of questions already in Zoom here, but please do keep questions coming as we're speaking. And I'm going to invite any of the panelists to comment on any of the questions we have here. I'm going to start, though. Some of them are quite specific and operational. Some of them more general about the talks given just now. I'm not surprised they've got one of the questions about the licensing model here. And I know that this is something that you guys have touched on already, but I'm going to invite you to expand on it. What is the business model used for licensing journal content to AI platforms, and how is that revenue shared with societies? I think you've each touched on that point in some capacity, but then we'd like to expand on that.
Yeah, maybe I can start off by indicating something that a lot of people are not aware of, and that would be that every technology company uses the data that we can license to them in a different way, right? And just to give a few examples, they can choose to only focus to use licensed data for or to teach the model how to converse, right? That will be one of them. The second one would be a domain-specific model, like a model focusing on financial data only, or maths, or legal information, right? And the third scenario could be to have training data repositories ready for experimentation. So a company could offer a playground for developers to come over and test all kinds of models or build their own, and then use sort of ready data sets to start experimenting with that. Why am I differentiating that in that way is because every scenario comes with a completely different legal and financial regime, as you can imagine, right? So I would say the use case scenario determines the eventual agreement. And then logically, there are all kinds of different restrictions based on the kind of data that we're talking about, the sensitivity, confidentiality, existing licensing agreements. So, I would say almost every partnership, every deal is an individual tailored work of art, right? Yeah, we can proceed to discuss that offline as far as I'm concerned, but that would be sort of my management summary of the situation currently.
Yeah, and then from my side, Research Solutions has, I guess, two kind of core ways of looking at this, and there's two core products. So Research Solutions historically is a DocDel provider. We work with 1,400 major corporations and provide them access to the end document, typically a PDF, through subscriptions, tokens, or the ability to buy an article or rent an article. And so we are working with large corporations as well as publishers to provide AI rights on top of that article delivery. And so you can buy an individual article and you can have an upsell for AI rights. And that's at the per article level basis, at the per library basis, et cetera. And we also can work with publishers where there's deals done directly with publishers to reflect that in our tool. So you can see you do have AI rights from this publisher. You can use it for summarization, et cetera. Most everything, or in fact, everything there is around summarization. And mostly everything I'm talking about is summarization in some way. It's not training. And so that's one way. Publishers are now, and I think we've signed about 10 or so different agreements, providing AI rights to their articles on a per article basis or a per library basis. The other, which I'm touching upon here, is really taking what we've already done with Cite, looking at those chunks of articles, and then exploring business models together with publishers, right? I think in many ways, as you look at zero-click search and you look at counter metrics, which are totally blind to AI, publishers will experience some pressure, right? Hey, you're charging me X amount of dollars, less people are reading this by all metrics I can see. Why should I pay the same, right? And so I think publishers and societies are going to need to demonstrate that their content is actually being used. And it is, right? It's being used in these systems. We just don't have a good way of looking at it. And so again, I think Wiley's done a good job already at this because they have a gateway. That gateway implies access. It also implies measurement of that access, right? And so starting to look at access, whether that's through a pan-publisher MCP, a publisher direct like MCP, I think is a good way, right? Controlling these things through agreements, contractual agreements, licensing agreements is a good way. And through technical agreements like, hey, if we open this up, we know who's using it, we know how they're using it, we can track how many times the AI interrogates it, we can track how many times they click through, et cetera. And so I think the business models, to Pascal's point, are starting to emerge. I think they're very different for different customers, whether you're a hyperscaler, whether you're a university, or whether you're a corporate. And I think there will need to be flexibility in those models as well because there's a lot of different needs. But I do think there already are license deals happening. And I think that's going to become increasingly standard. Frankfurt Book Fair, everyone we talked to, big things were AI licensing, whereas 2 years ago it was AI block.
Yeah, and I would say Josh reminded me of something really important, and that's, on the one hand, you have sort of a platform's responsibility. That's something that still needs to crystallize in courts of law, and regulators are contemplating all of that, right? But it refers to the extent to which a platform that licenses content can take a responsibility for what happens with it once it is outputting data, either regurgitated verbatim in parts, full text, the entire document. I mean, those factors influence everything, but the same applies to decentralized entities, academia, libraries, etc., that are not always in a position to implement really, really good guardrails, right? So that will take a huge amount of effort on that side to actually safeguard, protect against leakage, misuse, abuse, and all of that, or maybe the stuff being used by other models that haven't engaged in agreements with you, right? So it's a lot of work. So Josh, thank you for reminding me of that.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this reminds me that it has only been a few short years since the genie was truly out of the bottle with AI in the way that we now know it. And so it would be expected with any new massive technical or media change to have quite a high rate of change in this very early sort of nascent period. And I think that's what we're experiencing right now. There's such a wide range of things, so little standardization happening so far. I think perhaps that's now the part of the journey that we're on, is beginning to see that standardization beginning to happen, including with licenses.
Yeah, I think there's lots of opportunities here. What Josh said about, going from block to license. It's, the evolving space in which particularly the LLMs are working is, we're going to have payments through the system soon. There's going to be content discovery that way. It's going to be a new driver of revenue and driver of new business models that we don't know about yet. So I think it's a very exciting time again for society, publishers in general, because going back, I don't want to repeat it again repeatedly, but the idea that if you think about businesses that are creating content that is useful for these tools, academia really is number one. And then you get like social media, which is enormous, but has a varying level of quality.
So there's the exciting future state of how we can make sure content is leveraged in the right way with novel licensing models. There's also the downside of all of this as well. And some of the questions I'm sure are expressing some of the concerns people have about the challenges that AI presents. I think that's probably the source of the question here about limiting use. So are there technical tools to prevent or limit what AI platforms can scrape from our content without permission or licensing agreements?
I think Pascal, I was about to say, I think
go.
Pascal has some thoughts on this, but I just wanted to say, just to be devil's advocate here, I would say I just wanted to throw out a no to begin with, just because, you know, there are ways, but the bots are clever. If it's in an S3 bucket somewhere, a bot's probably going to get it, and the you know, Reddit blocked bots from taking all of the Reddit content, and the bots start going to Wayback Machine to get all of the Reddit content. So there's lots of edge cases, but Pascal will be more optimistic, I'm sure.
Maybe just a nuance in that, you know, there's a high diversity of vendors out there that can actually play an important role in relation to this. Logically, you know, there are the companies that can simply turn everything off, right? But that's like, you know, problematic, throwing the child away with the bathwater, as they say in my home country in the Netherlands, because you can then also block benign scrapers, right? That actually are meant to make the content on your site more popular and therefore add to your brand visibility, et cetera, et cetera. But sometimes the scraping is so bad that you have to revert to those options. But there are other vendors who can provide more granular instruments and actually go to lengths to actually identify all of the different scrapers, no matter whether they change IP addresses or names or whatever. And the purpose is not so much granular blocking. It's actually being able to negotiate with those companies, right? And I think there's a lot of future and opportunity in that. Besides all of the stuff that I know Mark, you know, will argue that doesn't work, like robot text and stuff like that, that can be circumvented. And maybe in the future, regulators will come up with certain things. I do think that Reddit has been really creative recently. They have engaged in litigation. You can Google search information about that. And they call them mount weasels. They put some non-existing wording on their web pages just to check whether the scrapers would, you know, capture that. And allegedly they would have done that within 15 minutes, right? So those are other methods you can use to at least be able to prove that the scraping is happening and who is doing it and which LLMs are actually turning up the data. And then you can still negotiate, you know, the licensing fees relevant to that. So I do think there are a lot of tailored options. And there's like the, you know, blunt force approach and then the negotiation approach. And then hopefully in the future, regulators will help us out as well to standardize some of the methods that are needed. I think that would be really, really helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, I think you've been so proactive in your optimism, Pascal, that you've convinced me to change my answer from a straight up no to, well, obviously it's more complicated than that. And I think what you were saying, Joshua, before about the pulling back, like it's a nascent space, it's the wild, wild west, and then it's going to get more and more controlled and more regulated. And there is ways you can set up to actually control your content in a much better way. And obviously not everything that's out there that's on the web somewhere is on the web somewhere. I'm pretty sure drug discovery companies have lots of private data, and they're still not locked out of the AI game because they're using things like federated learning to generate new models without sharing the information. So I think it's moving from a no, because they did that in the past, to we'll probably get to a much more regulated, you know, we have GDPR in Europe, and if you say on paper that should work, I'd say it wouldn't work. I'd give the same response, but it does work, and we do have regulation.
Yeah, I'm glad we got a good cop, bad cop debate there. I guess I would also call out not just what we can do now, but what we can prepare for, so that when firmer regulation is in place, we are ready for it. And so in particular, for example, the TDM rights reservation guidelines that the SDN Association has been involved in, where you can put some metadata on your content to indicate to any LLMs or AI or TDM actors, good or bad, that no, you cannot scrape my content. So it's not actively blocking them, but when the time comes, and it will come soon, that there is more enforceable legal legislation, we can say, well, we clearly put this on the site, you can't possibly claim negligence, at least. So we're preparing for that, hopefully quite soon in the future. Okay, good stuff. I'm going to move across to a very specific operational question. Our organization uses Microsoft Copilot with enterprise data collection, meaning the content we upload to it is encrypted and private. How reliable is this sort of protection? Is it as safe as advertised? Are big tech companies or others finding ways to circumnavigate these protections?
Yeah, so I'm happy to respond to that. Although, you know, first of all, this is definitely a cybersecurity question, and you know, so there are other specialists who probably are better suited at, you know, responding to this. But what I am seeing though is that there's an analogy to stuff that we have seen in the past couple of decades, right? And maybe I can focus on the differentiators. These technologies permeate everything. That's one. So that's very, very different. People are often referring to AI as a tool. I think it's incorrect. Even, by the way, if you ask AI itself, it thinks of itself more as like fire or something like that, right? And the reason for that being that it's inside everything, right? And the AI makers want it to be inside everything. So those are chips, networks, operating system, literally everything, to be able to serve you in a better way, know you in a better way, and also to train on anything that you submit to it, right? As a result of that, you know, everything will be amplified. So everything we saw in cybersecurity in the past 2 decades will be amplified as a result of that, right? And the other differentiator is these technologies are being developed so quickly. I think we can all agree that there's hardly any time to properly test everything, right? So, and I think those are the factors that contribute to a higher risk level, right? So you're talking about technologies that, you know, are being implemented operating system wide, will permeate all of the devices. So therefore, there will be a lot more threat and attack vectors, right, for people with malicious intent. But also, you know, there will be all kinds of accidental issues. I don't think all of those can be solved very, very quickly. I think we need to rely on red teamers, right? Who need to pen test everything. I think black hat conferences will have a field day, right? But it doesn't mean that one shouldn't, you know, start to experiment with these tools and maybe analyze them, like in a small sandbox environment, testing environment, to then draw some conclusions and maybe try and limit the reach of some of these tools and not like apply them to like a federated type of approach where you connect, you know, Salesforce to Workday to all kinds of other systems and then bam, slap AI on top of it. Then you shouldn't be surprised that sometimes things can go wrong, right? But I think everybody needs time to really understand what these technologies can do, what their reach is, you know, what the sensitivities can be. And in any company or organization that has sensitive data relevant to ongoing research or private data or stuff like that, we all need to be very mindful of what the effects can be. But it will not be foolproof. There will be vulnerabilities. There will be exploits, prompt injections, and all that. So yeah, exciting times.
I think what makes me more reassured about specific examples like Copilot is in the, you know, in my, they've got all your content message before. That was like pre ChatGPT 2 and pre everybody knew about like the genie was out of the bottle. And so it was very much in this kind of like passive ask for forgiveness, don't ask for permission. Whereas if your business model relies on you saying, we will not train our models on this, and luckily we're not in a monopoly, right? There's lots of competitive people, competitive companies looking for your business. So as soon as one of them fails on that point of we will not train our models on your data, then their business model is destroyed. So I'm a lot more encouraged by using models where they explicitly put up front, we will not do this because of what is at stake for them when their competitors are evolving so fast, as opposed to before when it was all passive and we're just trying things.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, thanks, guys. I'm moving across to a couple of questions here about the weighty topic of retractions that I know a couple of you have touched on already. If I maybe summarize those questions together, well, we know for sure that many LLMs are including retracted information in the information that they provide to users, which includes researchers and scientists. Much of that retracted content is marked up correctly. To the human eye, it's very clearly retracted content. It follows correct guidelines on how content should be marked up if it's retracted, and yet it is still indexed and not highlighted as retracted content. Does this indicate a lack of willingness or interest on the part of LLM providers in recognizing that content, or do you think it's ignorance or evil that resulted in that conclusion?
So for me personally, it's neither of those. I would say, you know, again, I think a lot of it is due to the speed with which everything is being developed and then rolled out to hundreds of millions of users, and then perhaps not tested as well as one should be doing. I think 3 years ago, when we started to look into the model's functionality, we identified maybe 26 issues, and we're now past 100, right? And, you know, I also think that there is something like responsible disclosure. I think because of the evals, the testing, you discover a lot that, you know, should be modified, changed, improved. But what we try to do is just flag them with the AI makers. We're not the only ones. So there are so many other people. We're effectively all beta testers, right? I think that's what's going on right now. And we flag that. And I think that a couple of things. I think that first of all, the AI makers are receptive to this because they want their models to be successful in many different sectors, including critical sectors, especially legal, for example. That's a very popular one right now. But then, you know, the legal profession can put forward a set of demands and requirements before they can even use those tools, right? And so the AI makers, to be successful in that space, will need to adhere to that. So what we have found is that they are receptive to it. They're not always in a position to change everything like super quickly. You know, so that can be a challenge. But we haven't detected like nefarious purposes, malicious intent, or anything like that. It's just that I think that there are a lot of questions and requests coming towards the AI makers right now that make it hard, I think, to, you know, cater to everyone individually and fix all the things that people want to have fixed, right? So more time will probably be needed for these models to be adapted, modified in the right way.
Yeah, so on my side, I think there's kind of like LLMs in early days where there weren't like citations, and then there's LLMs today that interact with the web, right, and summarize what is currently on the web. And so I think this like issue of retractions were in training like sounds really bad, but if you think about it, they've ate the entire web, and 41,000 documents is really not that much, right? And so as valuable as they are, I don't think it's as gotcha moment as like we might think it is because of how LLMs are today. They go out to the web and they summarize those things. They're doing, you know, retrieval augmented generation. And so the training, I think, mattered a lot more, and it still matters, but where I see most of like the challenges and stuff is around licensing what is new, right? What is out there? What is being interacted with the LLM that the human is like interfacing with? And so, you know, I would also say publishers are not the greatest, maybe to push it a little bit back on displaying this information. I used to have a Twitter bot that would say, is this article retracted? Because you just couldn't tell easily. And at Cite, we've done some analyses, and there's also literature on this that people cite retracted studies, like professors, right? And it's because they're unaware of it, right? They have it in their reference manager. It took a long time for reference managers to have some retractions. And so I don't think it's like an evil thing. I also don't think it's that big of an issue here. I think the bigger issue is that can we get ChatGPT and Anthropic and Perplexity and all these different tools to interact with the high value content as it comes out, right? The new stuff in a way that, you know, again, is attribution, like is fair, like doesn't blow up our industry, like in terms of like APCs and subscriptions and things like that. And I think that's to me kind of the crux of the challenge. Like the training has kind of been done, as Mark highlighted many times. It's already happened, and it's so much that 41,000 articles probably, like if you removed it, I don't think you'd get a difference probably in the output at all, or at least a noticeable one.
Yeah, that highlights a key point I think that's come up a couple of times, that humans were not doing it perfectly before AI came along. And so in improving our metadata and content quality for retractions, but also for other topics that have come up, such as accessibility to help with GEO, that also helps humans a great deal. So the things we're doing to help humans will help AI in this as well. Another topic which unsurprisingly came up in the chat is about hallucinations. The question was actually specifically for Cite, Josh, about how Cite deals with hallucinations, but I think it's a more generalized question as well about how now in 2025, we've had a few years of dealing with this, how we can have faith that the answers given don't involve hallucinations.
Yeah, so, you know, again, as the citations guy, I think the short answer is citations, right? Like we've had this challenge before. If you think about the early days of the web, massive amounts of like pages being produced. Hard to tell which one is real, which one's right, which one is official, which one is not. And so if you look at, you know, how we started to organize this massive explosion of information, just like we're having now, we started to look at citations, right? We looked at PageRank. PageRank was directly influenced by academic citations and bibliometrics. And so I think, you know, tools that we have today, like Wikipedia, or websites that we have today, like Wikipedia, and even the ranking of you know, Google, ties back to citations. And so ChatGPT did start with like that tweet that I showed you, where it was making up citations because it lived in its own world. Well, now it's citing web pages, it's citing blog posts. In some cases, it cites a lot of articles. It cites PubMed and things like this. Anthropic just announced an integration there. If you use Wiley's MCP, it'll go cite Wiley's articles. And so I think the best way to deal with it is to present the LLM a subset of the best content and say, here's where you get the answer from. It's from a peer-reviewed article. Okay, A, that article exists. B, does that article say it? So I think you have to think about it from a variety of different ways, which is not just that the article exists. I think that should at some point become table stakes. Maybe it's not yet. Is that article right? Has that said that article? Does it say that? And has that article been supported or challenged? And so I think, you know, looking at chunks of articles and presenting it to LLMs will help, you know, limit hallucinations. I don't think they'll ever be gone, but I do think grounding them in what we have is the closest to truth, peer-reviewed articles, is probably the best solution there.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it reminds me to emphasize with, and great question, by the way. Many thanks to the audience. You know, that it's not only garbage in and garbage out that we hear all the time, right? It's also, there are instances where you have, you know, awesome information going in and still garbage comes out, right? And then the reasons are, and then the question is, what are the reasons for that? And, you know, so we have seen many causes. It could be the system prompt, right? So not many people know that the way, you know, that models are being instructed to do or not do certain things is similar to a user issuing a prompt. They call that system prompts. Sometimes the system prompts are really lengthy and they start to conflict with the functionality of the model, right? Because the model is like instructed by language. A system prompt is language, and you know, language can be interpreted in all kinds of different ways, and sometimes you have the system prompt conflicting with not only the way the model works, but also the prompt of the user, right? And then, you know, something really important can happen, which relates to what Josh was saying, which is in the process of regurgitation, author, title of the work, and the content of the work are being, you know, mixed up, right? So that can happen even if you train the model on really good stuff, right? And that is stuff that needs to be identified and of course addressed. But there are many different ways to do that. And you know, I think Josh mentioned a number of those solutions. But that's, I think, what sometimes is of concern to the researchers who want to make sure that what they have been working on is being represented in the correct way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, and as Pascal said, thank you very much to the audience for asking such great questions. I'm going to close, I think, just with a final question from me to ask both Josh and Pascal. But Marcus sent his apologies in the last couple of minutes, by the way, he had to drop out. In many of the conferences and meetings we go to about AI, there's a real polarization between tremendous optimism about how overall AI will benefit both scholarly publishing and the scientific record and scientific progress overall, versus tremendous pessimism to the extent of, is this an existential threat to scholarly publishing, to science, to the public's faith in it? Where do you both currently sit on that spectrum?
I think on both sides. I mean, I think both are kind of somehow true. I think it is an existential threat, and I think it's also amazing, right? And so maybe because it's so polarizing is because it's so powerful in many ways. You know, I again have seen researchers, basically individual researchers, whether it's a professor or a grad student, creating really amazing peer review tools. And researchers are using them themselves to do their own peer review to find gaps before sending it to the journal. This is fascinating, like incredible stuff. But at the same time, people are using this to like put all this slop out there, right? Like you're starting to see more and more slop like come and be published, and you know, it's making it easier to produce this content. And so both those things are true. And I think that's why, like, you know, this is something we need to really think about and look at how can we practically address both things. Not all the way of blocking. I don't think that works. I don't think all the way just everything open and goodbye works either. I think there's this middle ground where it tries to minimize the biggest harms that we see and like accentuate the biggest positives. And again, I don't work for Wiley. I do think Wiley like has taken a good approach here where there's some chunks, there's some gateways. They're working with publishers to start to look at this content. And I think, you know, similarly, we're doing that, you know, at the corporate level primarily, but then also, you know, starting to work with smaller groups where they maybe don't have the resources of Wiley to do these things. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think it's a hard question, a good question. And I would probably say I'm on both sides of the spectrum kind of at the same time.
So for Wiley, we're very lucky that we can talk to thousands, literally thousands of scientific researchers and just ask their opinion first before we form our own opinion, right? And we get a lot of feedback, and we know that you know, the scientific community loves working with LLMs. And early career researchers especially are very enthusiastic. They, you know, they arrive from universities and have been using it already for a couple of years. And we think that that will only increase. And I think in relation to your question, I'm seeing a lot of similarity to the conversations around robotics and also self-driving cars, autopilots, and stuff like that, right? I think the initial ambition of the developers is to, of course, make these tools completely autonomous, right? But then you run into the many challenges that, you know, real life offers. And you discover that, you know, sometimes there's a need for remote pilots, satellite connections to see what these cars are doing, to sort of help the Waymos on their way and prevent all kinds of issues. And just today I read an article about how you can start to order your robots for, you know, your chores at home. I think they will cost you 20K, but you will need to allow for remote connections from, you know, IT support, right, who may intervene now and then. And that's what you will see with all of these technologies. I think everybody loves to outsource chores that are tedious, that they don't want to do themselves, parsing large amounts of data, doing the dishes, right? Anything like that. But everyone will also recognize or learn to recognize the limitations that technology sometimes confronts you with. And, you know, for critical sectors like the ones I mentioned, legal, finance, healthcare, you know, we are heavily regulated sectors for a reason, right? And I think with robotics, self-driving cars, and AI, we will learn to recognize again, like several times in the past with disruptive technologies, why those reasons exist, why the associated regulation exists, right? And sometimes that is through common sense. Sometimes it will be through actually experiencing the many downsides that come with, I think, introducing hastily, speedily put together technologies in some cases, right? I think that's sort of the way I'm looking at it.
Yeah. Great, thank you. That's a lot of information and food for thought, but that's been a great animated debate. Thank you to all the panelists for joining it. I've learned a great deal, including about cross-ons and man-reddits and new terms I was unfamiliar with. No doubt this debate will continue to evolve, and this won't be the last HighWire Best Practice webinar we have on this topic. Thank you to such a wide audience who's grown today. The recording of this will be shared with you by email as well. Did I see a hand pop up there briefly for a question, or was it just waving goodbye?
High five to Tony. Thanks, everyone. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Pascal. Thanks, Joshua.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Tony.
Bye-bye.